Joseph and his brothers. The story of Joseph starts in chapter 37. But before we go into chapter 37, we must go back to chapter 36. And here we have a chapter that consists of 48 sentences. And what is mentioned in this chapter is Esau and all his generals, Alufei Esau, the leaders of Esau. And it goes into a list of names, and the chapter keeps on repeating itself many times that Esau is Edom, many times. And in chapter 36, verse 6, it says that Esau took his wife, his children, his daughters, and all the families from his house, his cattle, and his cows, and everything that he gained in Canaan, and he went to a country from Jacob, his brother. Now, there is many details, and also the language is a little bit strange. He went to a country from his brother. And the reason he went away, so if you look in verse 7, because their property was much, and they couldn't live together on the same land. And Esau voluntarily goes away to the land of Edom. Now the question is, why all these details? Now if we listen all through, from the beginning, that Esau is Edom, and then we go to chapter 37, in contrast to what we said above, it says, and Jacob dwelled in the land of his father, in the land of Canaan. Now this is not information. This is to emphasize the contrast between the chapter that talks that Esau is Edom, as if to say, but Jacob lived in the land of his father in Canaan. Not Edom, in Canaan. Meaning that the blessing of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then to the tribes of Israel up to our present time, is that the country of Canaan is the country that belongs to the Jewish people. Therefore, we have the list, the details, before it gives us the history of Joseph. Now, in verse 2, right away, it says, and this is the history of Jacob, and who is mentioned? Only Joseph. And it says Joseph was 17 years old. He was the shepherd with his brother, and he is a friend of the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, the wife of his father. And Joseph said bad things about his brothers. Now, this sentence is extremely important because it says this is the history, the geography of Jacob, and it doesn't mention anybody but Joseph, because here we hear the beginning of Joseph, who is about to fulfill the promise that God said to Abraham, there will come a time when the Jewish people will go down to Egypt and be there for 400 years, and then they will come back and conquer Canaan, and this land will be part of the Israel, not Ishmael, not Esau, but this country will belong to the Jewish people. Therefore, we have here Joseph only and not the rest of the tribes. Now the question is, why does the Torah tell us that he was 17 years old? We know that every word in the Torah is important. And later, we hear in verse 5 that Joseph has a dream, and he tells it to his brother, and they hated him even more. And then in verse 9, he has another dream, and he tells it to his brothers, and then he also tells it to his father. But this time, it says not that they hated him, but they were jealous. And the way his father Jacob responds to the dream is that it says in verse 11 that his father decided to remember what he said. In other words, to write it down in his notebook, so to speak, and see what will happen with the second dream. Now, I'm not going to go into details what he said in the first dream or what he said in the second dream. This you all know. But the question is, why the first dream they hated him, and the second dream they were jealous? And why did Jacob write it down? So we see that the second dream they took more serious. And the reason most probably is, the first dream, they said, Joseph walks around the whole day and thinks that one day he will be the leader, and all of them will bow towards Joseph. So the brothers hated him more. They say whatever a person thinks during the day, he dreams during the night. We know that. But the second dream is a little bit different. It goes into such details, saying that it saw the sun, the moon, the 11 stars, they all bowed towards Joseph. Now, when it comes to numbers in a dream, sometimes in the Tanakh, it corresponds to a prophecy. Something will happen with those numbers. So if we take the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars, it amounts to 13. Now, if we go back where it says that Joseph was 17, so if you take 17 and 13, it amounts to 30. And now let us turn to a different place in Genesis. In chapter 41, verse 46, and it says the following: And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, and we know we're talking about Pharaoh, Joseph becoming a high official for Pharaoh in Egypt. So we said the reason why the Torah says that Joseph was 17, because if you take 17 and you take 13 corresponding to the dream, it amounts to 30. Therefore, when the brothers heard this dream, they said, oh, maybe Joseph is getting prophecy. And they were jealous. We can understand. Abraham was a prophet. Isaac was a prophet. Jacob was a prophet. And now it goes to Joseph. So they were jealous. The father was thinking, maybe there is something to it, to the dream. Maybe it's not a simple dream. Maybe it is prophecy. So what do we see? That every word, every story in the Torah has a reason. Not always do I have an explanation, but we must know that there is a reason. And mostly, the things that we learn in the Torah is educational. It educates us how to get closer to God. Yes, God talks to us through the Bible. Therefore, it is extremely important to know the words. There are many words that cannot be translated. I keep on repeating it because if you take serious the Torah, you should try to learn it in such a way where you can understand those words that cannot be translated. Let us continue in chapter 37, verse 12. It says that the brothers went with their cattle towards Shechem. And if we go to verse 13, it says that Israel said to Joseph, aren't your brothers in Shechem with the cattle? I will send you down there. I would like to send you down there. And what does he say? Hineni, here I am. Now we have to pay attention to verse 13. It doesn't say Jacob said, it says Israel said. And this is extremely important because this is the beginning of the Jews are about to go down to Egypt through this story. So the words of God to Abraham is becoming now a reality. God is fulfilling what he said, that the Jews will go down to Egypt. And when we go now to verse 15, while Joseph was going down, it says that a man found him, that he was wandering in the field, and the man asked, what are you looking? And the answer he gave, I'm searching for my brothers. Tell me, where are they? Now, this is so beautiful that it does not say that Joseph met the man. It says that the man met Joseph. And here, another thing which we have to pay attention, doesn't say who the man is. It says Ish, a certain man. Now, what I found out that in many places in the Torah, in the Tanakh, where it does not give the name, but it just says Ish, a certain individual, it is divine providence in action. It means an angel. To give you an example, when Israel meets the angel, it uses the word Ish, a certain man. And we find that in other places where it says Ish, and it means an angel. If we go to Joshua, Joshua meets an Ish, a certain individual with a sword in his hand, and we know it is an angel. If we go to the parents of Samson, there too the word Ish is mentioned, a certain man, an individual. And also when the parents of Moses are becoming part of the history, it says that a man from the house of Levi went to the house of Levi to find a certain woman. There is no name, Ish, a man. Here again, this is the introduction of Moses, which is the beginning of the redemption. It is an indication emphasizing divine providence in action. Therefore, now we can appreciate this sentence. And a man found him wandering in the field, and he asked him, what are you looking for? And what does he do to him? He tells him, go down, and he tells him exactly where he will find his brothers. Isn't it beautiful? Now, if we continue in chapter 37, verse 19, and when Joseph was coming and they saw him, one said to the other, here's the dreamer. Let's do something about it. Let's kill him, throw him into one of the pits, and we will say that he was eaten by an animal. And then we will see what will come out of his dreams. And then if we look in verse 21, Vayishma Reuven, and Reuven heard exactly what they said, and he said, no, we shouldn't kill him. Let's throw him into the pit, and we should not spill any blood. Now, we hear that Reuven is trying to save him. And then we hear that Judah is trying to save him. And we know that he did. Now the question is, why before Jacob dies, he praises Judah for what he did, for trying to save Joseph. He saw in him a born leader. And we know that Judah is always in the story doing something. He goes out and is shows himself that he is a leader, a born leader. And therefore we can understand out of Judah comes the Messiah, the leader, the future leader. So the question is, why Reuben's action, trying to save, was not evaluated in such a way as Yehuda's action? The answer is Reuben, the motive for Reuben was to save Joseph not because of he really cared. It is because he felt that he's the firstborn and he has responsibility. If we look in chapter 37, verse 30, or I would start from verse 29, Reuben came back to the pit and he saw that Joseph was not in the pit, and then it says in verse 30, he came to his brothers and said, the child is not there, and where would I turn to? In other words, he did it because of his responsibility as a firstborn, but the motive of Judah was different. It was a more deeper feeling towards his brother. And therefore, Reuben's action, the motive for Reuben's action was because he felt responsible. And when he turns to his father, he would have to give an account for what happened. But with Judah, it was born leadership. Now this gives us a better explanation why Jacob did not bless Reuben. And then we learn that they go back to Jacob and tell him that he was killed by an animal. And Jacob cries, and people are trying to comfort him, and he cries in such a way, and he doesn't want to be comforted. And then there is one sentence, the last sentence, verse 36, and the Midianim sold Joseph to Egyptians, and this is where the chapter ends. Now the question is, if we go into chapter 38, there is no continuation to what happened to Joseph. In chapter 39, it continues what happened to Joseph. But in between, there is a chapter 38, that talks about Judah. Now the question is, why does this chapter come in this place, dividing the two chapters together? What kind of a continuation is this? And why does it appear over here? There is a saying in the Talmud that God prepares the cure before the punishment. All through Jewish history, we use the expression where it says, the sun rises before the sun sets. And the example in Jewish history, we have the story of the Jews being expelled from Spain. At the time when the Jews were expelled from Spain, America was discovered. The Jews were expelled from Spain, but in the future history, the Jews will have a place where they can run away from Poland, Romania, and whatever country they suffered. They would be able to run away to a country called America. This was prepared by God. The sun rises in one place before the sun sets in another place. And we know also when we learned in the beginning of chapter 2 in Exodus, the story of Amram, the father of Moses, appears before the Jews are suffering in Egypt. God prepares the Redeemer, Moses, before the suffering in Egypt. He prepares the cure before the punishment. Therefore, I can now understand the story of Judah. The story of Judah is really the story of the future Messiah. Peretz That's the name of the forefather of the Messiah, who is a descendant of Judah. So God prepares the Messiah before he talks about the Jews going into exile in Egypt. Because the exile in Egypt also symbolizes the exile of the Jewish people. Whatever happened to our forefathers in the Torah really happens also in Jewish history. This we said in previous chapters, that Ma'asei Avot Siman Lebanim, things that happened to our forefathers, is an indication what will happen to their children. Now, before we go into chapter 39, I would like to repeat myself on something that I said before, that the Torah must be treated differently than a piece of literature like Shakespeare or Dostoevsky. The Torah, every word is important. Now, there is something that we have to pay attention, is sometimes the Torah tells us about a certain event that happened, and then when somebody repeats and tells what happened, he changes what in reality happened. And we have to understand, why is there a change in the event that really happened to when it's being told? Here we must pay attention, and we can learn a lesson. The lesson is educational, where we can understand what the message is. The story in chapter 39 tells us that Joseph became a servant for a very high official of Pharaoh. And then when we reach to chapter 39, verse 6, it says that the master gave over everything to Joseph. But then, at the very end, it says, and Joseph was very beautiful. Now, we have to understand that every word is important, so the question is, why does the Torah tells us that not only did the master gave over everything, all the responsibility to Joseph, but it continues and it ends that Joseph was beautiful. Now, this is an introduction to what happens later. And we all know this story. We know that the wife of the master went over to Joseph and she said to him that she would like to have a relationship with him. And we know that Joseph refused. But we have to listen to the story itself. There is certain details that happen, and then the wife of the master tells it in a different way. And the question is, why is she telling the story in a different way? Chapter 39, verse 11, and one day Joseph came to the house to do his daily work. There was nobody in the house. She grabbed him by the cloth and she said, I would like to have a relationship with you. Then it says, he left the clothing in her hands and he ran very fast and he went outside. Now, verse 14. Now let's listen to the story the way she tells it. She said to the people, to the servants of her house, look what they brought to us. A Hebrew man to make a joke out of us, to laugh at us. This man came to me and he was trying to rape me, and I called in a loud voice. And when he heard that I called and I yelled in a loud voice, he left the clothing with me and he ran fast and went outside. We have to pay attention to minute details. Now, let's compare to what happened and what she is telling. First, we have to understand, when she talks to her servants, she uses the plural. The governess, all of a sudden, lowers herself, and she becomes part of her servants. They brought us to make a joke of us. She wants their sympathy. She wants to cover up of what really happened. And then we know the story tells us that he left his clothing in her hand. And when she tells the story, he left the clothing with her. There is a big difference. And we don't have to go into details. We can understand the difference between he left the clothing in her hand while she was trying to seduce him, and the way she tells him that he left the clothing in the house. Now, there must be a reason for it, and we know. So we see that there is a reason for changing the story, and we have to understand the motives of that person who is telling this story. And it happens many times in the Torah when he tells the story of Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, when he's about to take a wife for Isaac. And we know the story of Pharaoh. He has a dream, and then he tells the dream, which is different from what really happened. And we know that when Judah is trying to save Benjamin from Joseph, he also tells what happened in a different way, what really happened in reality. Now, what I want to bring to your attention is to look at the words of the Torah in a different way and evaluate it in a different way. And if you don't learn in depth, you really don't know what the message is all about. And now when we come to verse 18, I want you to pay attention to a word that is missing in this sentence. She talks to her husband, and she says, when I raised my voice and I called out loud, he left the clothing with me, and he ran outside. He ran outside very fast. But if you really look what happened in verse 12, it says, he left the clothing in her hand, he ran very fast, but then he slowed down. He walked outside. And the difference is she wants to say that he was trying to rape her, and he was scared when I started to yell. So he ran all the way and disappeared. But what really happened is he was running away from her very fast, and then when he was sure that she is not running after him, he started to walk slow. He went outside. Everyone was running away from her very fast, and then when he was sure that she is not running after him, he started to walk slow. He went outside. Every word counts, and there is a difference between what really happened to what she is telling. This is a sample for many stories in the Torah. Every word counts. Now let us go to chapter 41, the story of Pharaoh with his dreams. This will also give you an explanation, the difference between what happened to what is being told. Let us listen to the dream of Pharaoh. In verse 2, chapter 41, it says that he saw 7 cows, beautiful cows, and then they were fleshy, full of flesh, and they were standing there and on the field. So this is what you hear. First, 7 cows, beautiful, and then they were very fat with flesh. Now let's listen when he tells the story to Joseph. Chapter 41, verse 18, and I saw out of the river came up 7 cows, very fat, with flesh, and they were beautiful. Now the question is, why did he change? Now here, I'll tell you something about dreams. People dream a lot of times and things that they see during the day, and at night they dream about it. But during the day, we control our thoughts. It's the nature of people. When something bad happens, they try to push it aside. It's really to survive. Sometimes you have to push away, remove the thoughts and say it could be worse or it's not so bad. You lie to yourself. You're trying to escape reality, but this is the way we survive. But sometimes, unfortunately, at night, when our controlling system is not as strong, things happen the way it is. We see things in reality. And now, this is an introduction to what really happened. When he dreamt, he saw a beautiful cow. Therefore, he talks about the beautiful cow. And then he talks about that they were also fat. But then when it comes during the day, he's controlling his thoughts. And the element of his selfishness comes into the story. He thinks, why say about a cow that is beautiful? A cow is made to eat. The more flesh, the more you enjoy it. So therefore, he talks about first that she was fat, full of flesh, something which I call subjective evaluation, something that concerns himself. So he sees that she is fat. And then he talks about that it was also beautiful. Beautiful is secondary. What is the main thing is that she was fat. But he's not telling the truth, because during the dream it was the other way around. Now this tells us a little bit about our way of thinking and what we can learn from it, that we have to face reality and do something about it. Now, my purpose of teaching is not psychology and not philosophy, but this was necessary in order to have a better understanding of the Torah. But now we're coming back to our main mission, is to bring us closer to God by learning the Torah and to see the most beautiful things that happens with Joseph. Joseph, the minute he comes down to Egypt, we have to pay attention. There is a word on his lips. Every person that he meets in Egypt, it tells them that it is God, Elohim. When he talks to the butlers, he says, God will interpret the dream. When he comes to Pharaoh, again, it is God. And he keeps on repeating himself. I want you to count how many times the word God is being repeated in the book of Genesis. Many times. And you don't have to ask a question, why is he doing? Why is he mentioning God's name? In reality, what really happens, the minute Joseph, who is a Jew, goes down to Egypt, he faces idol worshippers. As I said, the capital of idol worshippers. And there is a conflict between God and idol worshippers. So, in his way, he is educating them slowly, that there is a God, by repeating the word God. And if we listen to what really happened in a short time, let's listen to what Pharaoh is saying. Now, if we look in chapter 41, verse 37, it says that after Joseph interpreted his dream, Pharaoh and his servants liked the way he interpreted. Now the question is, what is to be? Why are they liking it? Why are they so happy the way he interpreted? They did not know that it will really happen, what he said. How can they be happy before the things are happening? the interpretation becomes a real thing, and it really happens. So how can they say they like the way he interprets? So if we continue in chapter 41, verse 38, it says, "And Pharaoh said to his servants, look at this. Did you ever meet a man that has the spirit of Elohim in him?" And then it continues in 39, "And Pharaoh said to Joseph, after Elohim told you what to say, there isn't a smart man like you in Egypt." Now, what really happened is, why did they like the way he interpreted before they knew that this will really happen, that the dream really relates to something that will happen later? There will be a hunger, there will be food first, and then there will be a hunger, and he would have to prepare the food during the good 7 years, but it didn't happen yet. So how can they like something before it happens? It's because he did not say, "I interpret, I, the way I see it." He only related it to God. He didn't give the credit to himself. And this was something new to these idol worshippers. That here stands a man who doesn't want to show that he knows everything, to show that he's smart, and everything he is saying that there is another one, not him, who gives him the answer. The credit should go to Elohim, not to him. Therefore, right away, he knew that whatever he is saying is something that is good. Now we're going to chapter 42, and it says that Jacob saw that there is food in Egypt, and he told them, "Go down and buy some food, and we will live and not die." We have to understand that there was a hunger in Canaan. Now there is a word here in chapter 42, verse 2. It says, "Go down." Now the word "go down" in Hebrew is redu. It consists of 3 letters. Now Hebrew letters is also equivalent to numbers. So the first letter, which is like an R, re, corresponds to 200. Du is like a D, corresponds to 4. And U corresponds to 6. So you have 204 and 6 is 210. And we know that from the time the Jews went down to Egypt and they stood in Egypt, they stood 210 years old, 210 years. When we talk about 400, we're talking about when God tells Abraham that his children will be for 400 years or 430, they will be in a land that doesn't belong to them. He meant from the time that Isaac was born, they were not in a land that belonged to them. Even though they were in Canaan, it still did not belong to them. It only became part of it much later, 4 generations later. So the reason I'm telling you, first to show you that there is no contradiction between the amount of years that God said to Abraham, 410, because in reality they were only 210 in Egypt as slaves, not anymore. So the counting of 410 starts from the time that Isaac was born. But the beauty of this sentence is the word redu, go down. He did not know. It was prophecy, slip of the tongue, I would say, that he told them go down for 210 years. You know, a lot of times I was wondering about Joseph's behavior. How come Joseph did not notify his father all these years that he is alive? And the answer we will find in the next lesson, which is in chapter 42, number 8. And it says, before that the brothers came down and they met Joseph. And Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. And then pay attention to the next sentence, which is verse 9. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he dreamed. And right away, he said, you are spies. Now, what does it mean? It gives you the answer why Joseph did not notify his father. He knew that the second dream was an important dream. It was prophecy. And God said exactly what will happen for him in the future. And right now he was in Egypt. And that dream did not become a reality yet. And therefore, the fact that he felt that something is becoming a reality, he did become a very high official in Egypt. But still, the other part of the dream, where the brothers will come, the father will come, and they will bow to him, this did not happen. And therefore, it says, he remembered the dream, and he said to them, you are spies. And we know this story goes into length. What Joseph is going to try is to get the whole family in Egypt so they can bow to him. So now he has a job to bring down the father, to bring down Benjamin. And then let's go to chapter 42, verse 37. And let's listen to this sentence, which happens to be something very special. Reuben said to his father, I take the responsibility. I will bring back Benjamin, and if not, you will kill my 2 children. Now we can let us go to chapter 43, verse 7, or I should say 8. And Judah is saying to Israel, send Benjamin with me so we won't die, and I will take the responsibility all the way through, and I will bring him back. So when you compare Judah's behavior from the time that he was about to save Joseph, and is now that he takes the responsibility towards Benjamin, we compare it to the attitude of Reuben. Reuben, as we said before, wanted to save Joseph because he felt that he will have to explain Jacob why he did not save him, because he is the firstborn. And also the way he spoke to Jacob, this is enough to give us a better understanding why Reuben lost his firstborn rights. Now let us continue. We said before that many stories that happen in the Torah, when the story is being told, what happened is being told in a different way. And there's always a reason. Now the same thing happened with Judah, speaking now to Joseph, trying to get Benjamin back. Now if we look in chapter 44, verse 18, we hear a long conversation between Judah and Joseph, and there are many, many details. And Judah tells to Joseph what happened in the past, and is trying to get Benjamin back. And if we look very careful, what Judah is saying is not exactly what really happened, and we have to understand why. Now, let us pay attention to what Judah is saying. There is a word that he keeps on repeating. He keeps on talking about the father and the child, how they were so close to each other, how they need each other, how if Benjamin will be taken away, the father, the old father, will suffer and may die. And he keeps on saying it. Now we can understand why he's saying it, is because in every person, as bad as he is, there is something which we call the image of God. In other words, every person has maybe a small ingredient of good when he is very bad. And what we have to do is just to find and understand there is an ingredient of good. And if you find it and you ignite it, you can have, I would even say, a volcano. He can turn back to his image of God and become a good person. I think this is the right approach an educator should have. Should always look for the good in the person, because every person has good in him. Judah could have had an argument with Joseph, but it's your fault, because this is what really happened. Now, if you yourself compare to what happened, word by word, to what Judah is telling to Joseph, you will see there's a big difference. And I want you to do it by yourself. I'm not going to bring down exactly what happened to what Joseph said. And the main thing is to see that he emphasizes the old father, the little kid who is so attached to the father, and the father is so attached to him, and what will happen if they are departed. And this is what Judah had in his mind when he spoke to Joseph. I have to save Benjamin, and I have to speak in such a language that it will penetrate his good part, and he will do the right thing to give back Benjamin. Now let us turn to Genesis chapter 45, verse 1. And Joseph couldn't hold back his tears, and he said, everybody out. He wanted only his brothers should be present. And in verse 2, he cried, and Egypt, the whole land of Egypt, heard what happened. And Joseph said, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? Which means, after all what happened to him, is he still alive? And the brothers couldn't answer him. They were very scared. Joseph is referred to as Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef is the most pious person in the world. This is what the Talmud tells us. And why is he considered as such a great person? If we look in chapter 45, verse 8, Joseph, instead of taking revenge, is saying the following, and now you are not the one who sent me to Egypt. It is only God. It was all divine providence. So we see whatever happened in the past, when Joseph called them spies and he tortured them with so many things, he didn't do it out of revenge. He did it because he wanted the father and his younger brother to come down and to see that the dream that he dreamt so many years ago was not just a dream, was part of prophecy. And we will continue to prove this point. If we go to chapter 45, verse 24, he sends his brother and he tells them, go fast to my father. And in the end, he's saying, do not fight each other. This is a beautiful sentence. They even worried maybe they will fight among themselves, blaming each other what really happened. And even that, he thought of it, and he said, do not fight among each other. And when we turn to chapter 50, verse 15, it says that the brothers saw that Jacob died. They were afraid of Joseph, and they say, now he will give us back to what we did to him. He will take revenge. But if we go to chapter 50, verse 20, let's hear what Joseph is saying. You thought that you did something bad to us, to me, but God did it so that I can do such wonderful things for the people of Egypt. So this is a good lesson that sometimes we evaluate God's behavior and we say that it's bad, and we don't really know why God acts in a certain way. We can never reach conclusions about God's behavior. And this is the lesson. You thought that you did something bad, but God had a purpose in the whole story. I would like to end these tapes with two prayers that is very popular among Jewish people. One prayer is before we go to sleep. This is the prayer that Jacob said to Ephraim and Menashe. It is in chapter 48, verse 16, and Amalach HaGoel, which means the angel that redeemed me from everything bad, should bless the children, and the name should be and their name should be called in the name of my father Abraham, Isaac, and they should multiply like fish. This is a blessing that we say to our children, and we also say it before we go to sleep. And then there is another blessing that Jacob is blessing Ephraim and Menashe. It is in the same chapter, number 20. And we say the following: God should make you like Ephraim and Menashe. This is a prayer that we bless our children on Shabbat. And with this, we end the book of Genesis. Thank you.